So good evening. I'm not going to start with showing you some actual attack traffic for one of our customers. What you're looking at on the screen here is the login traffic for a large top 3 telecommunications company, a household name. A couple of things they found very alarming about this traffic. The first is it lacked a day-night pattern. Anytime you're looking at human traffic and it doesn't follow a day-night pattern, that is cause for concern. We normally are logging into our accounts during the day while we're awake, not so much, at night while we're sleeping. The second thing that concerned our customer about this is no matter what they did from a marketing perspective, email blasts, television commercials, it had no measurable impact on this traffic. So they had no idea if their marketing dollars were well spent. The third thing was you can't see that, can you, very well? It looks like it peaks at almost 2.5 million logins per hour. This customer has millions of customers, but there was no reason why they should be logging in at that velocity. So this is what the traffic looked like prior to the application of any client-side signals. Now I'm going to take a quick tangent and explain what I mean by client-side signals. This is a replay of a user's interaction with that login form over there on the right. Here's a timeline left to right. Each of those tick marks corresponds to an event that plays out down here. Those are key down, key up events, mouse movements, mouse clicks, more key down, key up events, and the enter key. We take all this information, apply some algorithms, and generate various types of user fingerprints. This is an example of an automated interaction. You're going to see key events that are too fast to be human, and then what we call the magic mouse. Mouse clicks various areas on the screen without any mouse movements. That cannot be done by a human. It can only be done synthetically. Sometimes what you don't collect is of value, right? If you have a customer who navigates an entire workflow, but they never touch the keyboard, the mouse, or the screen on their smartphone, that's consistent with malware doing it all in the background. Once you start collecting this sort of information, you can look for maybe the same XY coordinate being clicked over and over again. To give you an idea how unlikely that is, this is how my XY coordinate changes as I move my mouse around the screen. So the idea that 2 humans click the same XY coordinate, not going to happen. Bots do that. They do it regularly. This is a woman entering in her password 3 separate times. They may not look identical, but if you break it into sections, the first 3 events are identical, next 3 identical, next 6 identical, and then the final 4 identical. This is how a bad actor types in the same password. And if you think about this, this makes sense, right? We all develop a rhythm entering in our password, entering it in so many times. A bad actor can enter the correct password, but he's never going to be able to match the rhythm. This is probably the best illustration of the difference between humans and bots. On the left in green, you have mouse movements. This should go away. Let me make that go away. There we go. On the left, you have mouse movements and then red mouse clicks. It's hard to see, but there are red clicks here all over the place, red clicks. There aren't even event listeners there. Nothing happens when you click that XY coordinate on the web page. Nothing happens. When I first saw this, I thought, oh, something's wrong with our data. And then we double-checked the data, and I started paying closer attention to how I surf the web, how my coworkers surf the web, my loved ones, and we do this. We occasionally click the left mouse button for no reason whatsoever. I don't know why. And you'll notice now when you do it, you'll think of me telling you you do it. Look on the right though, you can see the size, shape, and position of the submit button based exclusively on where the bots click. They don't have a quirk, they don't click anywhere else. When it comes to mouse movements, we will move the mouse aggressively to find the mouse pointer because we don't know where it is. We'll use it to track where we read, right? Track where we read, and it generates all this noise for mouse movements. And you look over here on the right, you don't see that same sort of noise. You see perfectly straight lines. The bots move from point A to point B. They don't overshoot. And even when they add entropy to this, it comes across as smooth arcs and curves. When bots really want to add entropy and look like a human, they'll typically record an actual human and replay that over and over again. Now, if we add to this kind of a left to right view of speed of navigating workflows, you'll find that the customers are kind of slow, the bots are really fast unless they intentionally add latency, But the bad humans are right in between when it comes to speed of navigating workflows. Let me give you an example. Let's say that each of you were to grab your phone, launch your banking app, and then log into the banking app, and then go to add a new payee, and then send that payee money. You'd likely have to look for the add payee button, right? Not for very long if it's a good user experience, maybe half a second, 0.8 of a second. But you don't add a payee every day. When you first open the account, maybe you navigated that workflow 7, 8 times to add all your payees. But bad actors, they add hundreds of payees per day. They navigate that workflow lightning fast. So we've even seen bad actors start to move the mouse toward the add payee button before it was even painted on the screen and visible. So at F5, when we first go online, apply some of these signals and take mitigating action on the bad bots, list all the good bots, because not all bots are bad, all we're left with are humans. And then we'll see who's navigating workflows lightning fast. And that's where the investigation starts. Those people oftentimes are engaged in some malicious activity. In addition to the behavioral biometrics, we'll interrogate the browser, collect things like plugins, fonts, and screen size. We take all that information, apply some algorithms to it, and generate a browser fingerprint. The real power is in the additional signals. And really early on, we never shared any of our secret signals. We just said, trust us, we have them. And it didn't really move the needle very much. So we met and we decided, we studied all of our signals, and we said, okay, which signals are we going to share to establish credibility? And these are the two we decided to share. This first one is what we call the emoji signal. It leverages the fact that different platforms render emojis differently. So if the user agent string is purporting to be Chrome, but they're rendering emojis like Firefox, we know they're lying about their user agent. And customers don't have any incentive to lie about the user agent. This one is a bit more sensitive to us. This is our floating point math symbol. Some of you might recognize this top string as a large hexadecimal number. So the decimal number system has 0 through 9, and every number in decimal can be represented with 0 through 9. Hexadecimal has 0 through 9 and A through F. So that's a very large number. Our JavaScript will ask the browser to convert it into decimal, and you can see it gets a number on the order of 18 quintillion. I had to Google how to say a number that big. It's quintillion. And you'll also notice that different browsers come up with different answers to that large floating point math problem. What's sensitive is they come up with different answers to this floating point problem. You know how long it took engineers to find a number that when converted to decimal gave different browsers came up with different answers? That took a long time. So just like the emoji signal, if their user agent string purports to be Edge, but they're doing floating point math like Chrome, we know they're lying about the user agent string. So these are the sorts of signals you could do a lot of damage with. Plugins, font, screen size, those are spoofed all day long. But when you start collecting the kinds of signals that attackers can't spoof, or in order to spoof would require way too much NRE, they're just going to move on to a softer target. In addition to the behavioral biometrics and interrogating the browser, we even interrogate the HTTP header, apply some algorithms to that, and generate the header fingerprint, represented by the HFP. The powerful thing about this signal is we collected whether or not our JavaScript executes. So we've tracked many attackers using just the header fingerprint. In addition to those signals, we also will obtain various automation frameworks and browser fingerprinting defeat tools like this anti-detect. I'm not a gambler, but I'm told by gamblers that if you could play all 5 hands at a poker table, that it gives you an advantage. Well, these online gambling sites, they try to prevent that by using browser fingerprinting. So gamblers came up with this to change their browser fingerprint, fooling the site into thinking they're 5 different people when they're actually one person. Well, we obtained this. Really smart people at F5 reverse engineered it and developed client-side signals to identify it. So now we know when somebody is using anti-detect. Anti-detect might not be something that you guys have heard of, but I'm sure most people in this room have heard of Selenium. And if you hadn't heard of Selenium, you just walk down the hallway to talk to your QA department, you're going to find experts in Selenium because it just automates browsers got a very legitimate purpose. It's used by enterprises all over the world to do testing. We obtained Selenium, the WebDriver, all the tools associated with the framework. We reverse engineered it, developed signals, so now we know when it's being used. And bad actors use this tool all the time. Browser Automation Studio is the third one. There are dozens of these that we've obtained and reverse engineered, but Browser Automation Studio is really easy to use. So I encourage you, if you have any automated tasks, you could just go to BAS and you'll see how easy it is. And really the point I'm trying to make is launching automated attacks does not take a lot of skill, because a lot of the skill has been built into the tools. My team gives me a hard time about this slide. They call it my hot dog slide, but I cannot think of a better way to illustrate that more is not always better. And we hear lots of vendors say we've got thousands of these signals, hundreds of these signals. When you're talking to a vendor, the amount of signals doesn't matter. It's the quality of the signals. You have to have a couple of those floating point math signals in order to detect the more sophisticated attackers. So now we go back to our login traffic at this large telecommunications company. We apply the signals and you see virtually all of it is attack traffic. Now, you saw in my bio, I worked for the FBI as a special agent, CIA as a cyber operations officer. I don't think it was in the bio, but I also worked as a beat cop back in the early 90s. It's where I kind of started my career. So I've seen some amazing things, but when I saw this, I found it jaw-dropping. 98% of all their login traffic was from malicious bots. There's the day-night pattern of the human traffic you're looking for along the bottom. And it's no wonder they couldn't tell that their marketing dollars were being well spent, because that's the traffic it was impacting. And it was dwarfed by all the attack traffic. The quote on the screen is from the CISO. This is quite common for organizations to grossly underestimate the size of the attack traffic. These attacks are coming from tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of IP addresses. And security teams are usually quite good at identifying the top 100 or few thousand noisiest IPs, but they'll miss the long tail of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of IPs that are used only once or twice because they're not hitting any rate limits. So think about the consequences of this much attack traffic. It isn't about just account takeover and fraud. Think about the infrastructure costs that are necessary to serve all of these requests. Think about latency that it introduced. Think about costs related to CDN or fraud tools that charge per transaction. So the consequences of this much attack traffic are pretty profound. So in yellow, we are flagging the attack and then passing it to origin. In red, we go into mitigation mode. So anything in red is not reaching origin. Something very important happens here. We detect a retool in stage 2. Now, there are two really important takeaways. One is you must have client-side signals. You cannot do this using network layer attributes alone. You must have client-side signals. And the second is you must have a second stage. So let me take a tangent to explain what I mean by that. So we have JavaScript that interrogates, the web and mobile browsers, collects many of the signals I discussed. We also have an SDK that sits alongside the native app because we've noticed that once you mitigate on web, many of these attackers move to the mobile API. So it's important to protect both platforms simultaneously. So the point of the JavaScript and the SDK is to collect some of the signals I described, pass it through the internet to an appliance. Now, if green is good traffic and red is bad traffic, you see something conspicuously missing there. No bad traffic reaching origin. That is a pipe dream. There are no perfect real-time stage 1 solutions. Attackers retool. They evolve. They get more sophisticated. So you have to have a second stage. And the second stage is where, and before I say this, I should warn everybody, I'm going to use a couple phrases that are going to make some of your eyes roll. But hear me out, please. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. I feel like if I could squeeze in blockchain, it would be the trifecta. Yeah, bingo, yeah. Shape Security, that's the company that F5 acquired. That's where I worked, and now I work for F5. Rated in the top 100 in the world in AI and ML. We're very good at it, And F5, since the acquisition, has continued to invest tens of millions of dollars in it. We're very good at it. And we recognize that even though we're good at it, it is actually not ready to be blindly trusted on whether or not to take mitigating action on transactions. And I see many of you nodding in the affirmative. These are people, your peers, who have experience doing this sort of thing and know it is not ready to be blindly trusted. There are really three things you need for a successful AI/ML program. One is the models, of course. Two is copious amounts of data. And the third, and this is what most people forget, are the humans. You have to have lots of carbon units poring over all of those alerts, fired off by the AI/ML systems, looking for false positives, for false negatives, making sure your models are learning properly. Now, it isn't enough for you to have stage 2 in humans finding malicious traffic in stage 2. You need the ability to update stage 1 to deal with that newly discovered malicious traffic. And by the way, this is what's necessary. Real-time defense in stage 1, retrospective analysis in stage 2, where you're looking at aggregate transactions, finding whatever retools have happened, new attackers who have surfaced, and updating that real-time defense to deal with the newly discovered malicious traffic. This continues into perpetuity. That's where we're doing battle with the attackers. And a common question is, well, how often do you have to update stage 1 to keep an enterprise safe? We might update stage 1 5, 6, 7 times in one day if we're dealing with a particularly motivated and well-resourced attacker. Other times it's once every few days, maybe once in a week. The enterprise doesn't actually have to be under attack for us to update stage 1. We might see an attack somewhere else across the F5 network and want to proactively protect the enterprise from that attack. And why wait till the attacker shows up, for us to mitigate it? So this multi-stage defense is very important. The real-time stage 1 and then the retrospective analysis in stage 2, and you can't forget the humans. They're just a necessary part of this solution. I used to say early days at Shape that I had dozens of these before and after. Later at Shape I had hundreds. Now since the acquisition I have thousands of these before and after. Every time the customer is shocked at the amount of automation, I'm no longer shocked, but for a long time I was shocked. It's routine for us to see 40 to 99.9% of all traffic reaching origin being automated. Now, our record is actually 100%. So let me explain how that happened. It only happened once, but what happened is there's an enterprise that has an application that the humans could navigate to. Then they deprecated that application. Humans could no longer navigate to it. And it wasn't an application, an endpoint that anyone had any incentive to bookmark. So no humans could get to it anymore. But that URL was hard-coded in all the attack tools. So they just kept attacking that endpoint. So 100% of all traffic hitting that endpoint were malicious bots. So 100% is our record relative to the size of the humans, but 100% is the most, but it isn't the highest volume and velocity. I'll show you an attack that is really the highest volume and velocity. So here we detected the retool. We pushed out a countermeasure to flag the attack and pass it to origin. And this is how we can tell when we're in observation mode, just flagging the attack, we know whether or not, if we go into mitigation mode, we're going to mitigate any humans, any good customers, because that's a false positive. We don't want to mitigate any humans. So we verify that our countermeasure is only going to impact the bot, then we go into mitigation mode on that countermeasure. And what you're looking at on the screen here is exactly what the Security Operations Center and the tactics team at F5 goes through every day against multiple attackers as we do battle with them and force them to move on to softer targets. Here's another example. This is what it looked like prior to the application of any of the signals, after the application. And again, you see the day-night pattern along the bottom. What I really want to draw your attention to is the subtitle, 10,000 autonomous systems, nearly 1 million IP addresses in 182 countries. And the reason we're seeing these attackers so distributed is because for a decade they've been mitigated by IP address or by autonomous system, by region, and we've just conditioned them. Now, it's the first thing they do. The first thing they change when their attack is being mitigated are those attributes. You have a question, Michael?
In your graph there,
yeah.
there's dropouts
Yep.
of the blocked attacks.
Yep.
Could you, what does that mean, or what does that indicate to you?
Typically, when we go into mitigation mode and the attack stops immediately, we're dealing with an adversary that's paying close attention. And they just stop. And then we see tiny one transaction probes for sometimes hours, days, or weeks until they're trying to circumvent the countermeasure. It's fun to see that we know that we're frustrating them. They're trying and they can't overcome the countermeasure. Other times we'll go into mitigation mode and they won't notice for weeks or even months. The attack just keeps going, which is also kind of nice to see. The key, by the way, when you go into mitigation mode is to do it in a way that the attacker doesn't immediately recognize that they're being mitigated. As soon as they realize they're being mitigated, it incentivizes them to retool. So the key is to try to do it in a way that kind of postpones their realization that their attack is being mitigated. We had a government customer that was under attack from over 100 countries, and they decided to block geofence everything outside the United States. And predictably, the attack returned the next day from within the United States. So yeah, blocking by these sorts of attributes is kind of a fool's errand. Here's another one. That has a day-night pattern, even has a drop-off during the weekends. But trained eye will tell you that these bottom portions don't go down far enough. There's still hundreds of thousands of people logging in the middle of the night. So you apply the signals, you see all the attack traffic in red, and then in blue, the reason I wanted to share this with you, this is these are third parties. They're not necessarily attack traffic, but you know, in e-commerce, these might be competitors and third parties doing scraping. At banks, this might be the Yodleys, Mints, and Plaids doing scraping as well. And a lot of verticals have these third parties. Insurance companies have third parties scraping their rates. So, you know, one important thing to realize is not all automation is bad. You have the credential stuffing on one end that is purely malicious, and on the other end you have a Google bot that is indexing the web so we can find things. And all the way in between those two bookends, we find various types of automation. All right, here's the largest attack, 6 billion transaction in just a few weeks. Relative to the human traffic, not that big. What is it, 63%? It's certainly lower than 99%, but 6 billion transactions. This attacker made a coding error as well. We won't have time to talk about it, but it's also refreshing to see attackers make mistakes in their code. That's a huge attack. So why are they doing it on login? Like I alluded to earlier, it's credential stuffing. They're taking a credential list from a spill or from a compromise of hundreds of millions or billions of username password pairs, and they just try them programmatically against the login form of all other enterprises. And because of consumer habits to reuse usernames and passwords, the success rate we're seeing is 0.1 to 3%. This is when we're in observation mode. We're not mitigating it. We flag it and pass it to origin. That gives us visibility into whether or not the login was successful. So 0.1 to 3% may not seem like a lot, but when you're trying hundreds of millions or billions, you end up taking over an awful lot of accounts. Now, it isn't just login. This is the create account application. Everything you see in yellow is unwanted bots. You have to really zoom in to see the human organic traffic. This is really common on e-commerce sites. Anybody that offers a loyalty program offers an incentive to open an account, or a refer a friend program, retail, any account that can hold something of value. We'll see money laundering, and they need hundreds of thousands, millions of accounts to engage in various types of money laundering. Refer a friend programs are exploited by fake accounts. Social media companies, social media, the value of these companies is dictated largely by daily active users. So there's this huge incentive to turn the other way on bots. The more fake accounts they have, the more bots, the more valuable the company. All they have to do is just assert without evidence that less than 5% of their accounts are fake, when in fact it's certainly an awful lot more. We actually went in line with a social media company, and 99% of all their login traffic was fake. They thought they had 8 million subscribers. They had about 800,000. They did not take that news very well. This is add to cart traffic. Okay, add to cart. Why would somebody launch automation against add to cart? Before the signals, after the signals, 99% of it is all bots. The reason why? The limited time offer sales. You may have seen stuff in the news with Ticketmaster and the Taylor Swift concert. No fans could buy the tickets. All the bots were buying all the tickets, and the bots came on so strong it took down the network. This is real. We see this across all of our e-commerce. Whenever they have a limited time offer, it could be a sneaker, it could be a concert ticket, it could be the next iPhone. Any limited time offer program, we see the bots come out of nowhere to try to buy all those products, and they sell them on the secondary market. Now, this isn't a couple 20-somethings working out of their home making a few extra $1,000. We did a full workup on one of these organizations. They're making millions. So there's a huge incentive to come up with sophisticated automation to buy these products and sell them on the secondary market for inflated prices. Now, if we remove all the bot traffic, you see, again, the day-night traffic of the day-night pattern of human traffic, and then you see some spikes. Those are the loyal customers, trying to buy the items unsuccessfully. And a lot of these companies, they're a lot like social media companies. Some of them also have a reverse incentive. I mean, think about it. Their products sell out in seconds. That's good. It's bad for their brand when in social media the loyal customers are ripping them apart. But they're a lot like social media companies. Sometimes there's this reverse incentive and they don't really want the bots to stop. Yes?
When you look at the data, for sure, anybody on the marketing side would not deny this. But to quantify it, to say, okay, which is worth more? Do I invest in your company to do away with this, as opposed to this is the cost of doing business? Have you been able to identify that piece and say, yes, the value is here, and you show a reproducible result in invoking your mitigation?
Well, I guess the first step is visibility, so you know what kind of automation are you dealing with.
But because you hear marketers say this all the time, this data, I hear that from the marketing side, that we know this is happening.
Yeah, the marketers we've been dealing with, we go in line and we take mitigating action. They bust into the room and say, where did all of our accounts go? Because one thing I didn't make clear, but
maybe I'm misinformed, but when I talk to them, it's like, yes, Kelly, that
I think they know there are bots. They don't know it's this
something's going
bad.
on, but they don't know it's that bad.
They don't know it's this bad. Yeah, and marketing, when you look at some of the attack traffic, you have to realize that it's been. If you could look to the left earlier in time, it goes for months. So, and it went up slowly over time. Kind of like it would increase if marketing was really good at their job. So they do the television commercials, the email blasts, and they do billboards, they do all these things, and over time the traffic grows and grows and grows. So they're thinking that it's because of their marketing. Yes, exactly. So they know there are bots, but they don't think they're bad enough, and they think that all this growth is organic and it's because of their marketing efforts. So when we go and we show them, actually it's not. 95% of all of this traffic is automation, and you have a fraction of the accounts you thought you had. It's the marketers that are most bothered by that. Yeah, because it's visual proof on a big screen that their marketing hasn't been successful. All the growth has been bots. Yes, sir.
Well, in the case of a social media company, aren't they establishing advertising rates based on the number of hits?
Exactly.
So it's their liability if 95% of their hits are bots and not actual consumers.
I would say so. Yes.
Going through the same thing recently.
Yeah, well, I was pretty outspoken about Twitter, so outspoken that Elon Musk tweeted my picture. Yeah. And a link to an article. And yeah, so I believe that like 80%, well, prior to the acquisition, I would bet my career that 8 out of 10 Twitter accounts are fake.
Yeah.
I really would. Now, let me back up and explain a little bit of why I believe that. I think we certainly have the time. There's an obsession on Twitter for followers. I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on any social media, but I created a Twitter account to do research, and I noticed this obsession with followers. Everybody wants more followers. So then I looked, well, is there a marketplace to meet this demand? And there is. There's a marketplace. So I went ahead and threw $1,000 at one of these markets, and I bought 100,000 followers. I do. I have over 100,000 followers. It's a fake account. It really. And then I tweeted garbage. I don't mean like, I mean garbage. Like random characters. You know that Latin filler on websites? I tweeted that, and I had all my followers retweet it. And they did. So I thought, certainly Twitter's going to discover this. I mean, how much more fake can I be?
That's great.
And it just, then I had 120,000 followers. It was really odd. So then I thought, okay, so there's demand, there's a market to feed that demand. I tested the market and it works. So I figured, what kind of countermeasures do they have? So I tried to write a script. So I wrote a script. I'm not even a programmer, I'm a hack. In a weekend, I wrote a script that successfully creates fake accounts on Twitter. And I didn't encounter any countermeasure. So they don't have any countermeasure. So then I said, okay, instead of making it somewhat sophisticated, because I fancy myself a really good coder. But I have to admit, I showed the really smart coders in F5 my code, and when they were done laughing at my code, it took me I don't know, 200 lines of code to write this that does these fake Twitter accounts. They said something like, I could do that in 40 lines. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Whatever. My code works. It works. Yes, exactly, you didn't, and I wrote this. Well, and they said, next time they'll help me. And I go, but actually, the point I'm trying to make is that I could do it without help. If I can do it, think what a skilled team of programmers can do. All right, so that's the third reason. Oh, I took away everything, any entropy I added. Instead of changing my IP, I came from the same IP, and I turned up the velocity on my script, and I just tried to, am I going to encounter a countermeasure of any kind? And I did eventually. They presented me with a CAPTCHA. And I went to work at a Russian human click farm a few years ago solving CAPTCHAs. And look, human click farms solve CAPTCHAs all day long. If any of you are using CAPTCHA, it's just friction on your customers. It does not stop motivated bots. Because what the bots do is they just take an image of if it's a traditional CAPTCHA or if it's reCAPTCHA, they'll have a human from India or Vietnam. They're going to go to your site, click the box, get the check mark, get a token, and send it to the bot. Really, it's if you're interested, you can email me. I'll send you a link to a video that we produced explaining exactly how this is done. Yes?
In your experience and the data that you have access to, why would someone want to register bots for a webinar? What's the motivation there?
Let me think. A webinar. I think maybe. This is just a guess off the top of my head, but when I do lots of webinars, and when there are 6 people who show up to the webinar, it's kind of deflating. When 2,500 show up to the webinar, it's like, all right, people are interested. And there's some people, I guess, that might go so far as to have a lot of fake people register for the webinar. Maybe. It's just a guess. But I'm seeing evidence of that sort of activity across lots of other verticals. I mean, people are paying for fake followers on Twitter. They really are, and I don't know why. I guess the more followers you have, the more interesting you must be. So you buy followers and you're seen as more interesting. I don't know. All right. So the reverse incentive at Twitter is another reason why I arrived at 80%. And then the final reason is whenever I went in line in a social media company and I saw those first 4 realities, they had more than 90% automated login traffic. So all those 5 reasons together is why I concluded that. Elon seemed to like it. But what's interesting is since the acquisition, my follower count has dropped down to about 60,000. So he's doing a much better job identifying my fake accounts, but it's settled in at around 60,000 for the last month. So because really what I did is I bought some really obviously fake accounts, and then I bought some sticky accounts. They're more expensive, but they look much more human. And all my sticky accounts, they're still fake, but they're still there. So he hasn't detected those. So I'm just waiting. If any of you guys know Elon, have him call. We can help him. We can. We can absolutely help him. All right, let's move forward. It isn't just log in and create account. And add to cart. Virtually every public-facing application we're seeing automation on. Some of it's malicious, some of it's third-party, some of it's a nuisance, and there are dozens more than this. These are just the ones I put on the screen as quickly as I could. And behind every one of these, there's a really interesting anecdote. Like for this hotel, every time the scraper put in the city, the dates, and picked a room, when you do that, it locks the room for 15 minutes to give you a chance to finish the reservation. So scrapers were locking the entire inventory for the hotel. Now, did they mean to do that? No. Some of the scrapers, by the way, are really good for the hotel. They want it because it generates business for them, but they would prefer it not lock their entire inventory. So there's some traffic, there's some bots that are bad, some good, and then there's some that are good that are accidentally bad. All right. So at F5, using these client-side signals and multi-stage defense to give visibility into the automation and mitigate the bad is what we call bot defense. Common question is, you can't execute JavaScript without introducing some latency, and that's true, you cannot. There's a cost associated with it. But we're typically seeing a net improvement in performance because we mitigate all the traffic that's hitting origin causing latency, and then we introduce a small amount of latency, typically a net improvement. This is from one of our customers. These spikes correspond to attacks, us going to mitigation mode, much lower latency. And then here's another attack on the mobile API, we go into mitigation and the latency drops. So yes, there is some latency introduced, but we typically see a net improvement. So after the noise of all the bots is removed, now you could start looking at the signals for bad humans, like pasting operations into fields you would not ordinarily paste into. And I don't mean password. Anybody uses a password manager, paste into password. I have an example of what I mean by pasting into fields you would not ordinarily paste into. Screen utilization. Bad actors do not use the whole screen. They have a terminal window, a spreadsheet, they have something else open on the screen that causes the browser to use less real estate. Your customers typically are using the entire screen. And I don't mean maxed, I mean 95 plus of the screen is used by the browser. And by the way, one of these doesn't mean anything. It's the totality of these signals and dozens more that you can paint a pretty clear and reliable picture on the intent of the human. Yes, sir?
For the pasting, how do you differentiate that from browser autocomplete?
We have a signal that we know when autocomplete is triggered. Yeah, good question. All right, so I already mentioned speed of navigating workflow. Log out, this is not shocking. We want our customers to log out, but they don't always. That's why we have session timeouts. But bad actors, they always log out. They have to, because they have to log into the next victim account. So if you see a device or IPs or infrastructure that they're always logging out, I take another look at those devices because it could be a customer, but it could also be a bad actor. By the way, these are where the investigation begins. Our client-side signals give us a really sticky device identifier. So if we see one device attempting to log into more accounts than you'd find in a typical household, that's a cause for concern as well. I mentioned the emoji and the floating point math symbol or signal. This is meant to represent, we take the IP address, geolocate it, look at the time zone of that geolocation, and we compare it to the time zone settings of the browser. If there's a mismatch, typically indicative of a VPN or a proxy being used. Here's another takeaway for you. When you're traveling and you're trying to use one of your streaming services and they're saying how you can't use it from that country, the first thing you do is you load a VPN and you pop out near your home and you think, I've beaten the streaming company, I'll be able to watch my movies. But you still can't. All you need to do then is go in and change the time zone settings of your browser, and that'll allow you to see the movie. I hope that's not the only thing you remember from today's presentation. All right, focus switching. This is Alt-Tab on a Windows machine where the browser loses the focus, something else gains the focus. Bad actors, there's a lot of task switching. Your good customers, not much by way of task switching. The most powerful signal, though, is the network intelligence. If we see a device on one enterprise engaged in malicious activity, then we see that device at another enterprise. Chances are it, too, is involved in a malicious activity. So the network effect is very powerful. I think you guys agree because you're all here. Networking, there's a lot to be said from bringing the intelligence from multiple organizations into one. So we talked about the bot prevention, but this is account protection, using these signals to, in the totality, to make a recommendation right in the header so Origin can either drop it, maybe say issue two-factor authentication or take some other steps because there's something clearly anomalous about the transaction. All right, so here's an example. This is a banking customer that came to us and said, look, there's these applications that are all fraud, something's off. Can you look in your stage 2, your retrospective analysis, and identify some signals that are unique to these fraudsters, this human click farm? And we said, okay, we'll take a look. First thing we noticed was key down, then key up. And our signals told us it was a pasting operation. But it wasn't into password, it was into first and last name. This is very unusual. I think we've all gotten pretty good at typing our first and last name over the years. And this isn't autocomplete because we have the signal that tells us that. So this is somebody actually going Control-C off the browser and Control-V in first name and in last name. So that is unusual. The second anomaly, mouse movements and mouse clicks. Not a lot can be gleaned just by looking at them, but if you overlay the protected form, the mouse never leaves a submit button from application to application to application. Never. So this is consistent with a bad actor using the keyboard to navigate the application, which is what the actor would do if you're trying to move really, really fast, because the mouse is really a slow way to navigate a workflow. And then reaches over and hits the left mouse button that's sitting over the submit button from the previous application. And it's hard to click the left mouse button without it moving a little bit. This is what the legitimate applicants did. They would move the mouse to the first name text box, click it to give it the focus, then they would type their first name using key down, key up. There were no pasting operations. The third anomaly, this is a user fingerprint I described earlier, browser fingerprint and the autonomous system number. It's a number associated with the company from which you get your IP address. What we expected to see was one user fingerprint through a browser, through their autonomous system for each application. But what we saw is lots of applications being submitted through one browser and one autonomous system. That's unusual. But I'm curious, can anybody in the room think of an explanation, a valid explanation for why this would happen?
Library?
Yeah, library, absolutely. If someone's at the library filling out these applications, yeah?
Institutions such as either a corporation or educational institution.
Yeah, and shared computers, pretty much the case. Yes?
Dan, would it be the same if we use remote browser isolation?
I don't know what that is.
So remote browser isolation is like a standoff system. All of our people use it so that there are various service sites around the globe, and we actually sign into it, and then we're actually surfing out, and that also blocks the malicious malware from coming back to us.
If everybody's using an exact, like a replica of the exact same browser, then that's exactly what it would look like. Yes, another explanation. Last time you've been in an airport, you might see a kiosk that says apply for a credit card here and you get 60,000 frequent flyer miles. That would result in this sort of pattern. So the point here is that, and I don't want to be a broken record, but it isn't one signal that you decide to mitigate a transaction. You have to look at the whole picture. And it's important that the vendor understand a little bit about the enterprise they're protecting. Do they have kiosks? How do we identify them in telemetry? How do we make sure our models aren't fooled by kiosks? So any solution to this sort of problem is not going to be a box that you flip on and forget about it. It just magically works using AI and ML. No, it requires a lot of collaboration. That's really the point I'd like to make on this one slide. All right, here's the fourth anomaly. This is 0,0 on the screen. 0,0 for the browser. There was a strange 300 pixel shift. This goes to the screen utilization score I was talking about. The mouse would move off the left side of the screen, come back, pasting operation off the left side of the screen, come back, and the repasting operation. So gee, what do you think is on the left side of that screen? Pretty sure it is the text file or the spreadsheet that has the PII in it to complete the applications. So in stage 2, we identify all of this, these anomalies. We push an update to stage 1, say flag all future transactions that have these same attributes. And we flagged roughly 1,000 applications a day. It just went on and on and on for weeks. So hugely successful. One example of many how you can use these client-side signals to identify bad humans, human click farms. The reason we developed this is we noticed as soon as we went into mitigation on web or on against the bots, and they would fail to retool, they tried but they would fail, eventually they resorted to being to humans, because they have access to thousands and thousands of humans that are willing to do simple tasks all day long for very little money. All right, the final way client-side signals can be used. This is actual login data for one of our customers. We noticed 20% of their customers were struggling to log in. Some of them took multiple attempts, others couldn't log in at all. They tried over and over and over again. We studied the client-side signals associated with all these transactions, and estimating that maybe 5 to 15% would call, 2,000 calls per day. There's a significant cost associated with that. But looking at the client-side signals, we determined that 6,800 of these and 1,100 of these were absolutely good customers, were positive based on all the signals. There was no reason to force them to log in again. So we recommended to the customer, let us do this analysis in real time and put a recommendation right into the header whether we believe it's your legitimate customer, and maybe just extend their session. So we call this capability authentication intelligence. And we did this with many customers. This so far has been a real game changer. This is a chart from one of our customers who uses authentication intelligence. They had a 30-minute timeout, which is represented, the conversion rate is represented by this, and we extended it to 7 days based on these signals, and you see a measurable uptick in conversion rate. This chart is from our customer, not from us. Now, a 17% uptick in conversion, it's kind of hard to really understand. It sounds good, but another customer, rather than telling us in a percentage, they gave it to us in raw dollars, and they said tens of millions of dollars in additional revenue simply by extending their session. So some organizations are going to mandatory 2FA across the entire enterprise, or CAPTCHAs everywhere, imposing a lot of friction. Others are going the other direction, using these kinds of signals to, really you're improving security with this continuous authentication on signals that the customer doesn't even know are being collected. No friction whatsoever. So that's the direction. Everybody wants the Amazon experience. When's the last time you guys logged into your Amazon account? I haven't logged into my Amazon account in a year. And I just keep buying stuff and it shows up the next day. That's pretty good. And I think certainly the younger generations, they don't like friction. They are not interested in solving CAPTCHAs, and I don't blame them, neither am I. All right, so here are the takeaways. I talked about everything here. I think the only thing I didn't talk about is the JS and the SDK. They must be hardened. If you're going to do this as a DIY project, then when you write your JavaScript, it must be really well obfuscated. Otherwise, the attackers will just reverse engineer it and start spoofing the signals. So that's very important. I guess this is it. Any questions on anything we talked about? I think we ran, we're okay on time. Yes?
I'm just curious what kind of impact this has for companies that are spending a lot of money for increased bandwidth to support 80 to 90% bot traffic.
Yeah.
And have you ever been able to go in and say, look, if we can mitigate this, you don't need multi-gigs worth of bandwidth that you're paying for.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that is not a planted question, I promise. But you're exactly right. Many organizations, they build out this infrastructure for all this traffic without knowing that 90% of it is bots. So it's like, don't make that purchase yet. Do not buy all that infrastructure, not yet. Let us go in line, give you visibility into the bot traffic, and then you can make an informed decision on the infrastructure you actually need. Yes, sir.
To be clear, when you're talking client side, F5 has code that they're going to put on the client to do this?
That's right. We inject JavaScript that runs inside the browser.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Runs inside the browser, collects all of this, and we just attach the payload to a subsequent post. Yes, sir.
You guys found anything strange with mobile clients in terms of like cellular aggregation points and stuff?
No, we don't place much emphasis on IP address. One thing we see with the mobile is, tens of thousands of people coming from one IP. But IPs don't really mean much to us. We're looking at much different signals. Because IPs, they just change so much. There isn't even a notion of a bad IP anymore. A lot of these attacks are coming from residential IPs. So in the morning, there's good traffic coming from it, and later in the day, there's malicious traffic coming from it. Blocking by IP, unless it's M247, you guys ever hear of that ASN? We've never seen any legitimate traffic come from that ASN, ever. They accept Bitcoin as payment, There are a couple, DigitalOcean, M247. Anybody who works in a security operations center probably recognizes some of these autonomous systems, but some of them are just notorious for attracting malicious traffic. Yes?
When you were showing the example of the locking up the hotel rooms, you had a plain seating plan above it?
Yeah. We saw 40 times human traffic on the seat mapper endpoint at an airline. We didn't quite know what the motive was there, and we really pride ourselves in knowing what the motive is. We talk to the airline customer, like what could be motivating them to, and it's 40 times human traffic on the seat mapper endpoint. And you've all seen the seat mapper endpoint, right? It's where you pick your seat. So this is our best theory, and we don't know if we're right, but there are companies that will study aerial imagery of shopping malls, and they'll run software on the imagery looking for the number of cars in the parking lot. They would conclude, of course, at various times of the day, if there are a lot of cars in the parking lot, then the mall must be doing well. And if it's not many cars in the parking lot, it's not doing well. So multiple images, a lot of analysis, and they could draw some conclusions about the economics of the mall. Well, they could be doing that for these airlines. They could be saying, okay, full flight, airline's doing well, empty flight, it's not doing so well. The only piece of data that contradicts that theory is that the automation took place every night at midnight. It's what we call polite automation. It's trying not to interfere with the human traffic. So they did it every night at midnight. You'd think if they really wanted to know if the airplane was full prior to the flight, they would do it in the 30 minutes before every flight took off. But, maybe that's a lot more work. It's easier to say do it all at midnight than it is to know exactly when the departure time is and adjust it accordingly. But it's just a theory. I think it's a reasonable theory, but we don't know for sure. Yes.
Have you ever had problems with automated defenses finding, say, disabled users would have drastically different might have drastically different inputs than normal humans?
Well,
not normal.
Yeah. We're obsessed with false positives.
Yeah.
We're just obsessed with them because some of our early day customers were large investment banks where like milliseconds really matter. So we just developed signals, dozens more than what I described, that give us much higher confidence that it's not, because I know as I go through some of these signals, some of you might be thinking, well, I do that, would I be blocked? Well, you might do those things that I described, but there's dozens of other things that you don't do that would prevent you from being mitigated. So it hasn't been a problem for us, but because we're obsessed over it. Yes, ma'am.
How long does it take from installation for you guys to detect something? The second part of the question is, you said mitigation. What tactic do you use to mitigate? And the third part of the question, I've been waiting.
I'm old. I'm gonna forget the first one. Can I answer the first one and then you give me the second one? What was the first one again? Oh yeah. Well, if the fastest we go is when the enterprise is under attack, and then they are incentivized to do things outside their normal procedure because they're under attack. So in a weekend, hours, we're typically can be deployed. We're never the gating factor. The gating factor is the enterprise. Typically, we can move very fast. Once we're deployed, we're in observation mode, and we're just flagging stuff and passing it to origin. Within hours of that, we can go into mitigation mode without false positives. Especially the first time we go online, there is really no sophisticated automation because the security team's been blocking them by IP or something, and they've been doing battle without a sophisticated countermeasure. So the attacker had no incentive to become more sophisticated. So stopping them out of the gate is usually really easy. It's when, 3 or 4 months later, when all the amateurs have moved on to softer targets and all that's left are the really professional and sophisticated attackers that have retooled, and then we force them to become very, very sophisticated. That's where the fun begins.
And what's the mitigation tactics do you use?
Well, as I said, you want to mitigate in a way that the attacker doesn't know they're being mitigated, if you can. So that means you just don't drop the session. You certainly don't redirect them to a page that says, we don't allow bots, so don't be a bot. And I've encountered that. I've encountered that when I was launching automation against some sites. They'd say, you're a bot. I go, well, thanks for letting me know. So what we do is we allow customers to redirect or forward, the difference being one, the bot knows it's being redirected, the other one doesn't know that it's being forwarded. So you could forward it to a honeypot, you can forward it to a high latency server to slow it down. We can respond with a fully formed HTML page to give it whatever message we want, like a natural failed login response. One of our customers tells us to change the password on credential stuffing, change the password to 5 X's and pass it to origin, which results in the good thing about that is it results in a natural login failure. The bad thing is the traffic reaches origin. And we'd like to avoid that, but they have the infrastructure, a huge top 3 bank, so that's what they ask us to do. So changing the password to 5 X's and passing it through, it's a login failure, except for the poor schmuck whose password is 5 X's. Then we're just facilitating that login.
And third, I promise the final question is, some of the WAF now come up with this kind of technology. How do you guys position yourself, especially to those marketing people?
Well, F5 is one of them. F5 has an advanced WAF that collects some client-side signals, and it's effective against a certain level of sophistication of bots. I mean, CAPTCHA, for some people, for some organizations, you deploy CAPTCHA, it's going to make the automation go away because the people behind the automation just aren't that motivated. They're going to move on to another target. But some automation gets by the CAPTCHA. Then you need a better countermeasure, like an advanced WAF. And then some automation gets past the advanced WAF, then you need something like our bot defense that uses just some of the more advanced signals. So it's really a question of how sophisticated are the bots? What countermeasure do you need?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Question over here?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are doing such a great job, with this cool stuff, but I wonder, have you figured out who achieved 5 nines on McFlurry machines yet?
No. I don't even know what that means. You'll have to explain that to me afterward. I don't know. Yes?
So client-side signals, where's the privacy line there?
Oh, I'm surprised no one asked that yet. Yeah, that's been a challenge. The biggest challenge is collecting all these client-side signals without collecting any PII. And we don't collect the key values, the key events are all timing related. So we don't collect any PII out of the gate except for IP address. We do collect IP. And we are deployed in Europe, and GDPR is a thing, and IP address is considered PII according to GDPR. But we're deployed, and we've been very successful. And in many organizations, we do start collecting PII. So out of the gate, just IP. But what happens typically is the enterprise will come to us and start asking questions that we can't answer because we don't collect PII. Like they'll say, okay, don't mitigate anything, just flag it and pass it to origin. And then we go and we give them a threat briefing where we show them charts that say, okay, here you had a credential stuffing attack. It was 9 million transactions in the course of 3 days. Came from these autonomous systems, this region of the world, here are the tools they used. And they go, well, how many accounts did they access? We go, we have no idea. They could have logged into one account 1 million times, or they could have logged into 1 million accounts once. We don't know because you don't let us collect account. And they go, we'll start collecting account. Okay. But out of the gate, no PII. Over time, as we establish trust and credibility, then we start collecting PII to provide richer insights. Yes?
There are some legitimate reason company uses bot for scraping or robot for process automation.
Yeah.
How do you segregate that legitimate
It's a collaborative discussion with us and our customer. And now we have a huge database of what legitimate transactions look like. We know a lot of these legitimate third parties like Yodlee and Mint and loyalty points aggregators. All these third parties, we have a huge amount of intelligence about them because our customers all share it. So it's a network effect. We share it and then we share that back with our customers. So we'll know. Like if it comes from N247, it's bad. We'll just mitigate that. There are some ASNs we know it's not good automation. It's bad. But then there's some that we go to the customer and go, look, this is automation. We don't know what this is. And they go, okay, that is a third party that they're doing testing for us. So allow list that. So we allow list that. And then we go to the next thing. We don't know what it is. And they go, we don't know either. And they have to check internally. And then they come back, go, yep, it's good. Allow list it. And ultimately, at the end, there's some automation. They go, we don't know what it is. They don't know what it is. And it turns out to be shadow IT. There's some guy somewhere launching automation. And now they have visibility into it, and they can put a stop to it. And then other times, we don't know what it is even after that expiration. And we're like, okay, what are we going to do? We don't know what it is. And the enterprise will say, okay, just, I guess, mitigate it. I mean, you mitigate it. Someone's going to come out of the shadows and they go, hey, why'd you stop my automation? And that's happened many times. They just mitigate it, and then somebody will send an email to the corporation saying, hey, I was scraping your site and I can't anymore. Why? And they say, well, because we don't allow scraping. We have an API. Use the API. And some people you might have an API and go, that's why we don't have a bot problem. Don't be fooled by that. Scrapers do not like APIs. They don't want to, they got to sign up, agree to some terms, got to provide their email address. I've actually heard from scrapers that we know they have an API, but I'm just going to scrape it, and there's nothing they can do to stop me. They don't want to agree to any terms. So just because you have an API, don't assume that the scrapers are using it. They're likely not. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Continuing from the privacy concern perspective, there are organizations that cater to people who are concerned about privacy, Electronic Frontier Foundation, the makers of Brave. How do you deal with people who are using things like Privacy Badger, like Brave, like utilities like that? Is the transaction mitigated? Is it stopped? How does that work?
They're allowed to use those private. We don't care if they disallow cookies. The one thing that we do require is the execution of JavaScript. And all of our customers, early days, we had to make the decision. Do we require JavaScript to be executed? And our earliest customers say, well, we require JavaScript. And I don't know how many have turned off JavaScript and surfed the web. It's not a very good experience. Most sites require JavaScript.
Well, there are some tools that say, well, I'll allow this JavaScript and not that JavaScript.
That's right. And many of our competitors are blocked but because of that. Okay. But our JavaScript has not been blocked due to any of that yet. Okay. Hasn't been. Because our bytecode changes every 5 minutes, so it would be hard to mitigate, I think, to block, because it changes from instance to instance. Yes?
So, first of all, thank you for your service at the FBI. I also spent 6 years there. When I retired out of DOJ, I was CIO at the Office of Justice Programs.
Okay.
Where I got hacked. We were the first civilian agency, right? I was also CIO for the state of North Carolina. What I'm concerned about is the Bureau came out with the list of the top 10 hackers that they put on the most wanted list, right? I got hacked in 2003. We're in 2023 now, 20 years later. We're still putting up with this crap.
Yeah.
If it were me, I'd go out and get these bad actors, right? Is there and I'm a Vietnam.
Yeah.
I'm a Vietnam vet. I told my friends, I said, look, we'll take all the Vietnam vets, we're all criminals. We'll go get them, right? So,
well, just let me know when you run for office.
There's got to be, is it all political that we're not going after these bad actors and we're just letting this stuff happen? What's going on?
Well, so I have some good news and some bad news. Okay. The good news is some of our U.S. government customers absolutely go after them. Right. And we help them, but they do the lion's share of the work. We just provide them with some signals intelligence, and they're able to go and kick in doors and execute search warrants and put handcuffs on people. Very rewarding. The bad news is all of our private sector companies, not one has ever wanted prosecution. Not one has ever wanted to involve law enforcement. They just want the attack to go away. They're not interested in the headlines. And we do what our customers want us to do. We don't advocate for one or the other. Our customer is always right. So when they say, make the attack go away, we're not going to involve law enforcement, we say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. That's what we do. I think the biggest problem, I'm asked this a lot because I visit, the security teams and CISOs of hundreds of organizations, and I make all sorts of observations. I went into one CISO and I said, look, and this is a customer of ours, and we had already dealt with all the automation and we were looking at manual fraud, and we said, hey, we found some manual fraud, we'd love to get in front of your fraud team. And the guy looked me right in the eye and said, F fraud, but he said the whole word. I was taken aback. I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do to that. And of course, he had some contentious relationship with the fraud team and did not want to help them. They were competing for budget, and we were just like finding ourselves in the middle of it. And then similarly, I'm at a different organization, same exact scenario, and she says, just a minute, she picks up the phone and she calls somebody, and the entire fraud team walked into the room. So those are the two differences. So I know a lot of people are asking for more budget, and getting good people is a real challenge, but I've been to organizations where they have huge budget, all the right people, but it's lack of leadership that is still preventing them from stopping this, because it's just political for them. They're building fiefdoms. I don't know what it is. But it's rare that I get into an organization with the right leadership, the right time, the right budget, and the right attitude. But boy, it's refreshing when that happens. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks for a great presentation. Along those lines, what is your overall assessment of the industry? I see banks and insurance companies, slow-moving industries as still being very friction-oriented.
Yeah.
Put more alligators in the moat, reinforce the file, and they're not worried about this kind of smart detection. What do you see? Any trends?
No, I agree that the banks are just moving fast forward to mandatory 2FA, and they're going to, I think, meet with a lot of resistance from younger customers, and they'll pay a price for that, and then they'll start catching up with e-commerce, because e-commerce is seriously, they want security, but they want a frictionless experience because they're all trying to compete with Amazon. So I think in time, it's going to be about eliminating friction. That's why I'm excited about the future of these client-side signals, because that's how you get security without friction. Yeah. Yes, sir?
But isn't some of that also like the feel good? My bank is protecting me by making it hard?
Yeah, I think some people respond that way, but I think a lot of others are just annoyed by having to enter in a second factor authentication. And I got a whole deck, we don't have time today, but I got a whole deck on how bad actors defeat 2FA. So if you really want 2FA that it's much harder to defeat, then it's a soft token or a hard token. You think people are going to say, oh yeah, I have 3 bank accounts, now I've got 3 tokens to carry around with me? I don't think that'll happen.
But if you use something like FIDO2 and you register your device, you register who you are, it's frictionless.
Yeah, it really is. I use it a lot. And until it's used by everyone everywhere, these are still going to be a problem.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It takes time to catch up.
Yeah, it does. But I use that a lot, yeah. Somebody have a question over here? I saw a hand. No? Okay. All right.
Really quick.
Yeah.
With this whole pressing charges thing, that's very interesting to me. Do you see that changing when the federal government or the SEC starts mandating reporting of cyber attacks?
No.
Is that not the primary driver of why they don't want to do that?
Look, them mandating reporting it doesn't have any teeth.
No.
And that's the problem. Now, the prosecution of a security professional who doesn't report, a criminal prosecution, then it'll start having teeth. But when I was in law enforcement, I would find proof that a bank or a retailer was compromised. And I would notify them, like, look, I have all your customer data, I got it in this investigation. And they would say, rather than notifying anybody, they would say, you can't really prove it's ours. Are they your customers? Well, you tell us. They're all your customers. I've interviewed hundreds of them. They're your customer. And they just say, well, you can't prove it. So they didn't notify anybody.
So I think it's probably more maybe fear, if they prosecute, it's more fear of headlines, fear of, they don't
Absolutely.
want-
It's
They
headlines.
don't want to be the first one to step forward.
They don't, and maybe somebody will have the courage to prosecute, survive the headlines, earn a good reputation because they prosecuted, then others will follow. Think about how everyone thinks ransomware attacks are increasing. No, they're not. I think it's the visibility into ransomware attacks. They've been going on for decades. I think what we'll never have visibility in is thousands, tens of thousands of companies were victims of ransomware and they paid the ransom and never told anybody. And then when big enterprises are targets of ransomware and they pay it and it becomes public, now they're like, well, we're in pretty good company if they got hacked, And then another big company, So now a lot of big companies have been targets of ransomware. So now when the Global 2000 gets attacked and they're the target of ransomware, they're much more likely to admit it because they're in good company. It's not the end of your brand if you've been hacked anymore. It used to be, but it's not anymore. And I'm hoping that it becomes, that everyone talks about it more and they start prosecuting more, over time. Otherwise, we're going to lose this battle. And by the way, State Department, I think, could do a lot. The U.S. government, federal level, you shouldn't be able to sit in another country, launch attacks, and it was when I was doing investigating, the investigating would stop. It would end. What am I going to do? Send a subpoena to Russia? No. So I think that there could be a lot more diplomatic pressure put on countries that are allowing attacks to originate from their jurisdiction.
Like North Korea?
All of them. A lot more pressure. Yeah. And maybe something kinetic if nothing else works. Blow up a data center. Did I go too far? Everything was going fine until I I was just kidding about that blow up a data center comment. Just remember, my name, Mike Phillips. All right, well, we're out of time. I'll be here for a few more minutes if there are any questions. My email address is easy. It's d.woods@f5.com. So if you have questions or want a link to that video of how human click farms are used to solve CAPTCHAs or the Genesis Digital Fingerprint Marketplace, there's all sorts of stuff that I love talking about. I'd be happy to just email me and we can have a follow-up.
One last question.
Yes.
You know why we can't capture all these people that try to get ransomware?
Why?
Because they ransomware.
Oh, that's good. Thanks, everyone.